then you can figure out, okay, now, what is 1/5 of that? What do I have 5 equal things of in that? Because you have to understand fractions, not just memorize how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide them. You have to understand what's going on so you can solve problems using fractions and not be intimidated by them. Because, like I said, it's just a number. And you have to understand that when you add and subtract them, they have to be the same. If you ask me for oranges and all I have are apples, I cannot say, well, I'll just give them to you. And we'll just call them oranges. You know, if you want oranges and all I have are apples, I can't give them to you. So if you want 7s and all I have are 4ths, I can't give them to you. If I have quarters but you need dimes for that machine over there, I can't give them to you, right? Unless I change the quarters. I can't change quarters into dimes. They only change into nickels and pennies. So then you have to ask me for nickels. I can change them into nickels, and maybe the machine will take 2 nickels instead of the dime. Yes?
There's such thing that like uneven fractions when like a number is divided by like a certain number that, well, for instance, like say you got a certain fraction, then they give you a number that isn't divided into equally. Does that go into like decimals and stuff?
You go into about 3 different lessons right there. When you change fractions into decimals, then sometimes they don't go in evenly and you have repeating decimals. But we'll get into that later. Right now we're just talking about really what a fraction is and how they are used and how you have to understand them. Because again, I'm not going to teach you how to memorize stuff like that. I'm going to teach you how to understand what you're doing. You'll figure out yourself how to do it. Because it only makes sense to do it one way. Because that's why most of you don't know how to do them now, because you tried to memorize how to do them when they were taught to you, because it didn't really make sense, so you just memorized what they're trying to tell you how to do it, and you've forgotten. Because there was nothing that made sense about it. It's got to make sense. Like I said, people say, now do you have to change to a common denominator? To me, you're not thinking. Because again, if you understand a fraction, and you have 5ths and you have 4ths, how could you add them together? That's the same thing as having apples and oranges. That's how it should seem to you. And I have a 5th and you have some 4ths, and you give me some 4ths and I already had some 5ths. I can't say I have this many 4/5. You see what I'm saying? It's what they are. You cannot add things together that are different. That's why you change the 3 men and the 7 women into 10 people or to 10 students, because that's what they have in common. If I have 3 dogs and 5 cats, I have 8 what? Animals, you can call them, or 8 pets, or 8, whatever you can think of that they can both be called. So that lets you know that your mind already understands that you can't add things that are different. You have to change them into something that they have in common before you can. And when you think about pieces, fractions, what they have in common is that once they are already cut, they can only be cut in the multiples of themselves. If you've cut a cake into 4 pieces, you can't now go back and say, oh, let me cut it into 9 pieces. You can't do that. Once you've cut that cake into 4 pieces, unless you want to really tear it up, if you want to still have the same size pieces all the way around, the only thing you can do now is cut that cake, each piece, into 2 pieces evenly, cut each piece into 3 pieces, cut each piece into 4 pieces, cut each piece into 5 pieces. You can cut each piece into 100 pieces if you can cut that small. But every time you cut this one, you got to cut the other 3 too. So you're always changing how many are in the whole by the multiples of whatever it was cut into in the first place. And you have to understand that you got to cut these into the same size pieces as you cut these. Then you can add them up and say I have 4 of them and I have 21 of them. Now I have 25 of those things. That's what you'd have to do to add those fractions. You have to make them the same. And then people say, now, there's sometimes people teach whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. I don't want to teach you like that. I want you to understand that if I cut this piece, each fourth, into 7 pieces, for every fourth that I used to have, I'm going to now have 7 pieces. Because I had to cut each one of them 7 times. You see what I mean? It's got to make sense. When you have 1/4, you're going to change it into 5 nickels. You're not going to have 1/4 and get 1 nickel for it. Because it's got to still be equal. You want to have the same amount. You just have different sized pieces. You see? But if I had 2/4 and changed them into nickels, I'm going to have 10 nickels, right? I'm going to have the 5 nickels 2 times. If I had 3/4 and changed them into nickels, I'm going to have how many nickels? 3/4, how many nickels?
15.
Oh my goodness, I want all of you guys' paychecks. And I'm going to just give you what I think you deserve out of them because, okay, if you had 3/4, you'd have 15 nickels. If I had 4/4, I'd have how many nickels? 20 nickels. If I had 5/4, I'd have, you see, for every quarter, you're going to have 5 nickels now, you see. Every quarter, 5 nickels. So if I had 1/7, if I cut that 1 piece into 4 pieces, all I have are 4 pieces. But when I had 3/4, if I cut each piece into 7 pieces, I have 7 pieces 3 times, or 21 pieces now. You see, I cut each piece into 7, and I used to have 3 pieces. So now I got 21 pieces. Make sense? Okay. Now when I have 4 of them, and I also have 21 of them, now I can count them all together and say I have 25 of them. They're still 28s. They're not turning into 56s. You have 5 dimes and 6 dimes. They don't turn into 11 20-cents, do they? They're dimes. If they started out dimes, they're going to end up dimes. So don't ask, does this number stay the same? I want you to think. It's not that this number stays the same. It's the size of the piece. They are now 28ths. They used to be 4ths. They're now 28ths. These used to be 7ths. They're now 28ths. When you count them all up, they're still 28ths because that's what they are. Okay? So, when you add or when you subtract in fractions, they have to be the same. Now, Brenda is going to tell you now, just step by step, how you solve an adding or subtracting problem, because now that you understand it, you need to be able to just do it. When you see a problem and you see that you have to either add or subtract a fraction, you have to go into the mode and think, I got to do 4 things. Every fraction rule has 4 things you have to do. If you do it in that order every time, you'll get the answer correct. 4 things you have to do. The first thing you have to do when you add or subtract a fraction, Brenda, is what?
Write it vertically.
You're going to write the problem vertically. That means up and down. Because as you see, when you go to changing things, you want things to just be still clear so that you can not have a lot of jumble and track it down and do the work. Now this is stuff when you want to memorize something, this is what you need to memorize, these 4 steps. So if you write them, every sense that you put into learning something gives you a better chance of retaining that knowledge. So you're hearing it because I'm telling you. You're seeing it because I'm writing it. If you also write it, that's another sense that you are putting into the learning of that. It is a fact, a research fact, that the more senses you put into something, the better you'll retain that information. So I suggest that you write it. Then you need to say it to yourself over and over again. The reason I can do all of these things just like that is because I've done these things over and over and over again for 30 years of my life. Anything you do over and over again, you will learn to do. Repetition is what causes you to learn. Now, I can sit here and you can understand everything I say every time you come to class. If you don't go home and practice it, it'll be new to you every time I teach it. To make it your own, you have to practice it. What you're doing here is learning it. You have to practice it to retain it. You have to look at it to understand it. You have to figure out a way that you will always know what to do. Everybody learns differently. Whatever it takes for you to learn, then that's what you have to figure out. So the first step is to write it vertically. Because sometimes in a problem they'll give it to you horizontally, but you'll need to write it vertically. Okay. Second step, Griselda, whether you're adding or subtracting fractions, the second step after you write it vertically is to what?
Find a common denominator.
Find a common denominator. You have to know that you have to make them the same. Sometimes they'll already be the same, but you're going to check yourself. This is your checklist. Find a common denominator. That means you have to figure out what each one of them can be cut into that's the same. Denominator, remembering that denominator. It means what kind it is. You have to make them all fourths, or all sevenths, or all 25ths, or all 56, whatever it is that they can both be cut into, remembering that they have to be cut into the multiples of that number.